everyone. Welcome to your newest episode of the Cosmic Matrix podcast with your host, myself, Laura Matsu, and my husband, Bernhard Gunther. And on this episode, we are going to be discussing soul purpose versus ego desires, finding your true path. Most people end up unhappy in life because they are actually living someone else's life, meaning they live lives of other people's values, they follow the plan of what their parents wanted for them, or they follow the script of what culture and society told them would make them happy. And then when they get everything they thought they wanted, the job, the car, the career, the family, the home, whatever it is, they get everything they thought they wanted, then all of a sudden they're depressed, or they acquire an addiction, or some crisis happens, or maybe they just feel like life is meaningless in spite of the fact that they've achieved everything the world or their parents told them would make them happy. And instead of investing in more self-help at this stage to just adjust their mindset, or maybe sometimes at this crisis stage, people attach to a new relationship, or they attach to a new religion or ideology in hopes that something external will save them. If you're at this point in your life, you need to realize that these moments of crisis and meaninglessness are actually a call from the soul to go into your own inner world. And your soul will require you to descend into the underworld in order to find your true path. So this means going into your body, your feelings, your unconscious, so you can retrieve the parts of yourself that you may have lost over the years. In James Hollis's words, you are being confronted with finding out, quote, rather than ask, what does my tribe demand of me? What will win me collective approval? What will please my parents? You need to ask, what do the gods intend through me? Your soul will call you to live the life that you are destined to, a life of meaning without division between your internal and external worlds. Many people will hear this call. Very few will answer. Most will hang up the phone multiple times. But the soul is persistent. It will create symptoms, often intensifying them, until you start to turn towards your inner world instead of running away from it. Many people these days are asking themselves this question: what is my true purpose in life? But maybe you don't know what that purpose is or where to find it. And once you realize that the path that you're on isn't fulfilling you in this deeper way, you often either have to begin this descent into the underworld or resist it at a great price. And this is often what brings people to therapy or to get some sort of guidance or support. But the people you go to for guidance also can't tell you what your purpose is. And if they do tell you what to do, I would be very hesitant to listen to another person's advice, because at best, these support systems can only help you reveal the wounding or traumas or identifications that are within you that are in the way of your purpose. And many people who feel called to their purpose realize that something is moving and changing within them, but also a part of them may feel scared because there's a risk of that change, or maybe there's a deeper healing that path may require. And that can also bring up fear because the path before you is not clear yet. You are stepping into the unknown. You may still hold on to your old life because you're attached to the comfort and security it provides, while another part of you, your soul, wants to realize the life that your higher self wants for you and have the courage and embodiment of soul to live out those demands fully. So this podcast is about helping you through the process of finding your true path, what this is going to require you on an inner level, and how to differentiate between your ego desires and your deeper soul purpose. So in the first hour, we're going to discuss the definitions of ego desires and soul purpose. What do we mean by that? The crisis of meaning that society is in, and how we get influenced by cultural conditioning to follow paths that are not in alignment with who we really are. We'll also talk about how this relates to Jung's concept of individuation. We're going to define what that is, how to recognize the calls of individuation, and what happens when you refuse the call. And lastly, what are some signs that you can tell that you are on your true path? In the second hour, we're going to discuss why many people who talk about purpose can potentially mislead you and why conventional approaches to this loss of meaning often fail. What is in the way of you finding your purpose, and what inner work will this require? How we're going to also discuss how there can be a sense of guilt when you individuate, and what's that about? How do you end up living your parents' unlived life? We're going to also share some personal experiences in us and some critical moments of us realizing our soul purpose, and how hidden hands will come and help you when you're individuating, and how this relates to Joseph Campbell's concept of following your bliss. And before we get into that, we just want to do a quick call to action for those who listen to our podcast. What really helps us in the algorithm and helps people see our podcast is if you have time to just leave us a quick review on Apple Podcast. You can either give us a rating or leave us a comment. It really helps people find our podcast, and anyone who's interested in psycho-spiritual work, feel free to send them our podcast as well. But the reviews really, really help us and also help other people really get a sense of what our podcast is like. So if you have a minute to support us, we would really appreciate you going on there and leaving us a review. And sorry, one thing I also forgot to mention, in the second hour, for those who are new to our podcast, we have a second hour available for members of our veilofreality.com membership. And if you want to go to veilofreality.com/membership, you can join. I think it's only $11 a month, and you get access to 140 hours of extended material of each podcast. Okay, so let's begin. Let's just discuss ego desires versus soul purpose. So I can just define, and then you can pipe in maybe on what you can add to that. So ego desires, I'm going to define this as when you go after a path that others have told you should do, or you learned as a product of your social and cultural conditioning that you think will gain you some sort of external validation. And I also want to note the ego is not a bad thing. The ego was created by the soul to give the soul a structure, a direction in life. And Jung even points out that we need to build a healthy ego in the first half of life. In evolutionary astrology, the ego actually relates to your family of origin and how your early experiences of childhood conditioned you on an instinctual level. So it relates to your innate self-image. So for example, if you had a difficult childhood, the ego can take on a negative self-image. And ultimately, you want to be able to work with the ego so that you can build a healthy and strong ego to handle the difficulties of life. And then during the second half of life, which is when Jung says when you individuate, you want your ego to be an expression of the light of the soul rather than just a product of your conditioning.
Exactly. So this is a very, very big thing and very big topic, by the way, in general, because we've seen a lot, especially I just want to frame that as well, of the past 5 years of everything that has happened, which we discussed in our recent podcast as well, the disillusionment. People started to question these deeper questions about who am I, what do I really want? And I would also argue that, in order to truly find your deeper soul purpose, there is a necessary, quote unquote, disillusionment or descent that needs to happen. Because when we talk about ego desires, most of us, when we grow up, we never question where our desires come from to begin with. And that is a big thing, a lot of this conventional positive thinking, chase your dreams, believe in your dreams, do what you want to do, just do it. This is great and fine, but we never question the desires and aims and goals we pursue, which, as you rightly said, can be very socially, culturally conditioned from our parents, from the media, constantly bombarded, even subliminally or consciously, of what they tell us will bring us happiness, fulfillment, and it's all externalized, right?
Yeah. And you see this when, with these mainstream approaches to manifestation, manifest your desires. A lot of these manifestation, quote unquote coaches out there, I noticed, are always telling people that they need to manifest cars, money, riches. It's all based on a materialistic framework, right? It has nothing to do with the inner fulfillment those things provide or could provide. It has nothing to do with the internal level.
I would even say, in order to, as we will discuss more in this podcast, to truly know your purpose, your deeper soul purpose, you have to know yourself.
Yes, and we'll talk about that. Yeah. So let's talk about the soul.
Yeah.
The soul is basically the immutable consciousness that you carry from life to life. So as source, as God, as a divine, manifest into form, it begins to separate and individuate. So human consciousness has a natural individuating aspect, which gives form to all of the distinct humans, all the distinct beings, even beyond human consciousness. So your soul is an aspect of source or the divine, but doesn't mean your soul is the same to everyone else. And this is the individualizing aspect of consciousness. So as God incarnates into form, it starts to individuate and separate from God and starts to develop individual characteristics. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, so you could say that the soul is very a unique expression of the divine working through you.
Exactly. That's well said. Exactly. So your soul purpose is that calling of that soul. It's an expression of that deeper soul nature within you. So that's what we're looking for. We want something that gives us bliss, a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose, which ties in. It's very interesting because, you know, we are in this culture that largely has been separated from God, the divine, a sense of deeper meaning. And I see a lot of people, they're experiencing the symptoms of meaninglessness. And you know, James Hillman says that a life that constricts meaning actually wounds the soul. And meaning will make everything endurable, he says, perhaps everything. So basically, without meaning, we're kind of lost adrift. We're lost desk scrolling on social media. We just consume media, taking advice from random people, and end up more and more confused and more empty inside.
Yeah, that's the trap of meaninglessness. I've literally wrote a chapter about that many years ago in my article in 2016, The Perilous Path Towards Awakening, where I go through the various traps on the path towards awakening. And the trap of meaninglessness is exactly that, when you're overwhelmed with the world, even ties what we call nowadays the black-pilled mindset, that, you know, this nihilistic mindset, oh, everything is fucked, basically screwed.
Yeah.
There's, you know, no hope, no meaning, everything is just a disaster, and you just give up and just point the middle finger to the world and like, who cares? Nothing means anything. Nothing matters.
Yeah, right? Very nihilistic.
It's very nihilistic. It's a very low level of consciousness. It's very inertia. It's lack of creativity. It's very just paralyzed in life.
Yeah, and you see that, and the issue is with this trap of meaninglessness is we have so many things to distract us, to consume.
Yeah.
We're in this like information overload society, but we're also lacking meaning and wisdom. So it's like we have like all of the junk food, but we don't have the deeper depth that the soul requires in order to learn and grow. So we actually have to create our own meaning. We can't expect in a materialistic society where there's a focus on outer value as markers of success. So money, fame, whatever, PhDs. I mean, if you're listening to this podcast, you probably don't think those things matter as much as the average person, but these experiences of inner meaning are not spoken about. So I just want to say that when you want to find a life of meaning, you are already going against the grain of the collective culture.
But that's literally the setup, at least in the Western culture, I'm sure in the Eastern as well. But when you go to school, like I went to school, nobody told me about the deeper meaning of life, of my emotional intelligence, about something deeper to connect within myself.
Yeah.
It was all just about memorizing and becoming good technicians. And I was early on basically told, well, you know, the meaning of life is have a good education, get a degree, have a good income, found a family, and buy a house, and that's about it.
Yeah.
Right? This externalization of everything. Right?
Yeah. And the ego that gets influenced, these ego desires, gets heavily influenced by this cultural conditioning. Like I know for myself, I've always been a really creative person. I've always known, not always, but for a pretty long time, you know, I was artistic as a child. I'm artistic as an adult. I'm very creative. But I remember through my life, it was almost like the life that culture and society and my families expected out of me started to weigh on me more and more over time. This idea like, oh, you're not going to university and getting a degree and working a 9-to-5, 40-hour-a-week job, so therefore something's wrong with you. And this is the whole thing, is that, you know, if we aren't secure enough in ourselves to rebel against that cultural conditioning, or we have certain wounds or desire to seek approval, we can end up just following that path or being like almost guided into that path against what our own personal interests are.
Exactly. And I would also add that the sense of meaninglessness can happen anytime in one's life, sooner or later, right? Or maybe not for some people in the whole lifetime, but this is a very important point, and it's an opportunity of transformation. It's almost a descent, the disillusionment. And in my personal life, I had this actually early on as I was going through high school. And then after high school in Germany, I went straight to the University of Munich studying business and economics. And I did it just because everybody else was doing it. That was most people study because, you know, need to make money. So it's good to study business, economics, all of this. But I remember sitting in the lecture halls in the University of Munich and did all the courses which I had to do. And it was not only boring, but it was just so meaningless. I had no meaning. I didn't get it. I realized I feel exactly the same how I felt in high school. I don't want to do this. Why am I here?
Yeah.
And now I'm actually voluntarily here as a young adult, but I had a complete sense of like, I don't want to do this. I don't know what to do. Right? I was like, and then through amazing synchronicities and even divine grace, maybe because I surrendered to it and asked the question, there must be more to life, all of a sudden I was guided through a friend to play the drums. And then all of a sudden that's where I found meaning and bliss. Like Joseph Campbell said, that bliss is not necessarily finding a specific definition of a purpose, but an experience of being fully alive and engaged in life.
Yeah, and so
right?
at that turning point in your life, you answered the call and you decided to abandon that plan of studying business and going down this path and follow the thing that really excited you, right?
Exactly.
But there are also many people who don't heed that call, who go through it, or who maybe, you know, the main thing is that the ego will get identified with certain personas to gain approval from parents, from society.
Yes.
So if you like identify with the persona of like, I'm a smart student, I'm very smart and capable, and my parents think I'm going to be a doctor or a lawyer, right? And then you gain approval from that, you may actually continue to follow down that path because the wounded part of your ego is feeding off the approval that doing this goes, while you repress all the shadow material of your gifts or your talents or the unaccepted qualities. So basically what I'm saying is that on this path of growing up, we may develop a certain attachment to certain traits that we will get approval from our parents from, and then we'll repress certain traits. So if we're in a family that's seen to be like very academic and intellectual, right? To fit in with that tribe, to fit in with that family, we will also have to have those traits. But if we're more creative, or if we have other gifts, we have to repress that material into the unconscious in order to gain approval. So a lot of the work begins when you want to find your true path, is unearthing those qualities that you had to disown in childhood, throughout your life growing up, in order to gain approval, and looking at that and engaging in a process of shadow work.
So that's interesting, because the call is always there, but are people already receptive that are they hearing it, or they're rejecting it for the reasons you just mentioned?
Yeah.
And by the rejections, they build a false persona, a false life, so to speak, and the shadow grows bigger and stronger underneath the unconscious.
Yeah, exactly. And then what will happen is it can grow so unconscious that, say, if you were a very creative child, but you grew up in this academic family and you did follow the path that the academic family wanted for you, you got a PhD, right? But then having a PhD and identifying with your intellect, you might have really strong judgments against artists and creative people. Like, oh, they're so lazy. Why are they doing that? You know, deep down inside, that's part of your shadow that you're projecting on them. And you wish you could be creative, and you've forgotten about even the fact that you were creative because now you identified as an academic. But they're deep down inside, your projections towards other people are showing you the things that are actually need to be unearthed for you to find your purpose. And I think that's what's the critical thing of, like, we'll talk about this in the second hour, just changing your mindset is not enough. You actually have to look deep within you to find that purpose, to retrieve the parts of yourself that you've disowned along the path.
And I would also argue or say out of experience, or what people also mistake, they think that soul purpose is one specific thing you do. It's a specific career identification or being an artist or whatever it may be. They think it's one specific action they need to do. But it's a much deeper process, because I was speaking out of experience. Soul purpose is actually a process in itself, and it relates very much to the Jungian concept of individuation.
Yeah. So let's define individuation. I'm going to give a great quote from James Hollis. And he says in his own, and I'm going to begin the quote, Jung's most compelling contribution is the idea of individuation. That is, the lifelong project of becoming more nearly the whole person we were meant to be. So I want to define this right away, because individuation is not about perfection. It's about wholeness. This is my own words, so I'm stopping the quote, by the way. But I see this again and again because people often have, especially people who are interested in spirituality, they have a perfected self-image. Like a spiritual person needs to be like this, right? And this is a way that they repress more and more shadow material. But this is about wholeness, meaning accepting all aspects of your personality, light and dark, working with the shadow and channeling the shadow consciously in a creative way. But it doesn't mean you are a perfect person. I really want to outline that because I see this a lot in spiritual communities of like, even this whole idea of like manifest your desires, like I want the perfect body, perfect husband, perfect home. Like it's all about perfection, right? So individuation is about wholeness. And I'm going to continue with a quote. And he says, this is becoming nearly the whole person we were meant to be, what the gods intended, not the parents, not the tribe, and especially not the easily intimidated or inflated ego. That's really important. So I'm stopping the quote again. So intimidated ego, meaning like, oh, I really want to be a writer, but I couldn't do that. I'm not good enough. I'm not that great at that. Or the inflated ego, which is like, I am going to be the most world famous writer in the world and have my movies made in, I'm going to be the next J.K. Rowling, right?
Driven by fame.
Yeah, it's one of the two. It's either a diminished ego or an inflated ego. Neither one is healthy, right? And then continuing the quote, while revering the mystery of others, our individuation summons each of us to stand in the presence of our own mystery and become more fully responsible for who we are in this journey we call our life. So often the idea of individuation has been confused with self-indulgence or mere individualism. Really important point. But what individuation more often asks of us is the surrender of the ego's agenda of security and emotional reinforcement in favor of humbling service to the soul's intent.
Wow, that's a great quote. And he also, even in his quote, points out very important, individuation doesn't mean to be an individualism in the sense of what society sees an individual, which is most often some sort of cult of personality, oftentimes a very narcissistic personality we look up to, right? In let's say celebrities and all of that.
Yeah.
So individuation is the process of becoming whole.
Yes. And it relates to working with your unconscious. So this involves shadow work, retrieving your projections, anima-animus work. The Jungians would also talk about working with complexes. So all of these are pieces, all of your deeper healing work where you're really finding out the parts where you're stuck or you're limited or you've maybe disowned parts of yourself. All of this can contribute to your individuation. So how can we recognize the calls to individuation? I can see it a lot in people who join our courses, and it often doesn't look the way that they think it would look, but here's how I've seen it. So often they have like a serious problem in their life that they're dealing with or a block. I also see it in breakdowns. So a relationship falls apart, or they get fired from a job, or maybe they just quit a job suddenly. Serious illness, emotional or physical, can be a call to individuation. A major death or a loss. Or it can just be a general feeling of restlessness that's calling for a change in the basic structure of your life. And I've noticed with people, the situation will often get worse the more you resist confronting it. And it will eventually turn into this general feeling of being psychologically and spiritually disconnected from your life until you decide to, quote unquote, answer the call, meaning confront the problem and find out what it's trying to teach you rather than trying to cure it or make it go away. That is such a critical part of the individuation process, because I think we live in a culture where we just want to feel better. We just want to put a Band-Aid. Tell me the solution. Tell me the book, the hack, the thing I can do, right? And this is what leads people to go to psychiatrists and get self-medicated, like just get this depression away from me so I can feel better, right? Yeah. And I understand people do that because they really need to. They're really feeling bad, but the main thing is you need to confront the problem and dive into it rather than just cure it and fix it and make it go away. It's not about putting a Band-Aid on it. Is that all of your symptoms, all of your issues, actually turning towards them is the cure that you're looking for. It's not just putting a Band-Aid over them. And I think that's the main thing to watch out in this culture, because we are in a culture right now which is becoming more almost like hyper information overload. We're like, oh, if I just watch this 90-second TikTok video, it's going to tell me how to feel better, how to feel happier. Like, we're this instant gratification culture. And I have to say, to turn towards the problem and to just be in that crappy feeling and try to find out what's going on within your inner world that's causing it is an uncomfortable process and is already turning against the grain. Because if you tell the people around you, most likely, unless they're engaged in inner work, that you're not feeling well, they'll be like, oh, how can we make you feel better? How can we make it go away? Oh, I did this thing and it worked for me, right? They'll always be ready to give you solutions to make you feel better instead of telling you to turn towards the pain, and find out what it's trying to teach you.
I see this a lot on social media, this whole trend of hyper optimization.
Yes,
right?
exactly. Yeah.
I call it your body, your health, your physical health, your mental health, how to learn faster, study better, all this very surface, superficial, personality based. And some of the advice is good. I don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater, but it can be extremely overwhelming and they're also very contradictory, by the way. If you really don't know yourself, it can make things worse than better. But if a crisis like that appears, you're absolutely right. It's about entering the crisis, and there's another necessary foundation which we've been taught in our materialistic 3D based society that doesn't recognize a spiritual reality or lives in the illusion of separation. That all there is are lessons, and life is not going against you; it's for you. So whatever happens in your life, the question is, what is it trying to tell me? If there's a breakdown, if you're destruction, right? There's a bigger process going on. There's actually works in your favor if you can really surrender to the process and understand how this process is also a reflection in your psyche and is a deeper call, right? And that cannot be answered or resolved through a rational thinking or rational problem solving, like, oh, I just need to get rid of this, I just want to feel better, right? There's a deeper process that requires an internal transformation, because that's what shadow work in the individuation is all about, right? It's coming to alignment with something deeper and truer within yourself, your soul. And the crisis we're experiencing is like a dismemberment or destruction of the false ego personality, and with it, the false life many of people have been living. But it works in your favor. Right? It may not feel and sound like this in the moment, speaking out of experiences, out of my own experience, it sucks, right? But if you stick with it, and especially don't fall into the victim blame trap or escapism, or kind of just distract yourself and avoid the whole process, it is a rite of passage, a transformation where a deeper true self is being reborn.
Yeah, but I also want to say, let's not just pathologize addictions or old patterns of repression and escapism, because those tend to, so this is basically what happens when you refuse the call, right? Your addictions, like old addictions will come back, old patterns of repression and escapism, they show up with a vengeance. I often notice when people are at a turning point in their life, the problems that sometimes even the ones that they thought they were over, they show up with a vengeance, like crazy, like on drive, right? On overdrive. And this is actually from a Jungian perspective, okay, the complex, the wound, I guess you could say in regular language, is coming to a head. It's all coming to a surface. It's all in front of you, right? And now when it's right in front of you, now you have all the material to dive into it and find out what is this about. Because even I have to say, as someone who went through conventional detox therapy and like had to detox through the conventional system, really helped me in many ways, but it didn't get to the root on why I was addicted. It got me out of the physical addiction, but then as many people who are addicts know, it will transfer onto something else. Like maybe you quit the alcohol or the substance, but then you get addicted to media or something. You get addicted to Twitter, whatever, right? So the thing is you need to have an intense curiosity to be like, what is this addiction about? Where did I pick this up? Gabor Mate would ask why not the addiction, but why the pain? So diving into that pain that's underneath the addiction is key, because I notice that basically when you refuse the call, it's like almost like you have to discharge an immense amount of psychic energy to prevent the individuation from happening. And that's why the addictions get worse. It's like, oh, I need to even go on overdrive because this sense of unhappiness within me is just getting stronger. The addictions need to tamp it down. But I have to say, turn towards the addictions, the distractions, meaning like ask yourself, what am I feeling inside that's making me turn towards this? What is that about? And really start to inquire into your own inner world.
Yeah. So what you just addressed, this increasing sense that something is missing in one life, something is not right, despite all external accomplishments, for example, and a feeling of being spiritually and psychologically disconnected from your life can also continue for months, years, even decades. Some people have the breakthrough, like something happens in their early 20s, like me or you, some in the 30s, some in the 40s, 50s, or 60s.
Yeah.
Right? It can also linger on for years and decades. The refusal of the call and as Gurdjieff would say, plastering up, like putting buffers on all kinds of, artificial Band-Aids, so to speak, to cover up what needs to be confronted.
Yeah.
And dove deep into it.
I know. And especially, I mean, if you think about like the risk of change, the risk of answering that call, like imagine if your whole life was built around someone else's values, right? You even imagine if you even married someone based on what your parents wanted for you. You took a job and you went to school for 8 years based on somewhat what one's wanted to you. So I have to just acknowledge that the risk of change is huge, but the reward you get out of it is even greater. So the risk is in relation to the reward. So if you have built your whole life around a lie, and by the way, I just want to say, it's really important when you're at this phase that it's not necessarily necessary to just blow up your whole life. It just means that something is missing in your life that wants to be lived through you. Because I think that sometimes people prematurely, without going into inner work, they can actually blame people outside of them. They'll blame their job. They'll blame their husband. They'll blame their wife. They'll blame their parents, right? And I'm saying to examine the dynamics that made you go down that path. But the moment that you start blaming people and thinking that it's people outside of you that need to change or they're responsible is the moment that you need to pause.
That's the ego hijacking the process, actually.
Yes, because I think this is a big risk that people think like, oh, something is missing. And I do know people who have blown up their whole lives, by the way, and it turned out fine. So I just want to say that there's moments that can be appropriate. But I think it's really important to pause and inquire in some degree of inner work, because there can be all sorts of complexes and all sorts of projections that can come out in these moments of discomfort. And the psyche will automatically want to blame someone outside of it for the way that things have gone.
That's when you're caught up. We can take David Hawkins' map of consciousness for context. That's also being stuck below 200, right? The need to blame anyone or any situation external of yourself for your own unhappiness. Yeah. Right. And also, but this is a very key point, even Gurdjieff talked about, and he was more direct in his teachings. but the necessity to face the lies you're telling yourself. So the disillusionment can be intense when you realize when in the age of 40 or 50 or whatever age it may be in the middle of your life, you realize that your whole life was based on a lie, that you weren't living your own life. And I want to add to that as well, very fascinating, one of the most common regrets on a deathbed based on Elizabeth Kübler-Ross, who was working with thousands of terminal patients, helping them transition. The number one regret on a deathbed was that people, or paraphrasing, I wish I would have lived my own life. I didn't live my own life. I lived according to other people's expectations, what I thought would bring me happiness by comparison, but I didn't live my own life. I wish I would have been more authentic. And that authenticity comes through the individuation process.
Yeah. And I also want to say just one other thing, what happens when you refuse the call. Sometimes I've seen that when people refuse the call for so long, the problem in their lives externally will worsen until it shows up as a quote unquote outer event. So maybe a woman who's like really unhappy in her marriage, who's tried everything she could to connect and nothing's working, and all of a sudden her husband suddenly has an affair, leaves her, right? That's the outer event. So sometimes we try and push, ignore, repress the problem, and it's getting worse on the external world, and then it blows up in our faces. And I've seen this happen as well. And I actually see this as a blessing in people's lives. It's like God having your back, you know? So if you get fired from the job that you hated anyway, or the husband that you didn't feel emotionally connected to suddenly leaves you and has an affair, sometimes this is emotional suppression, ends up turning to a physical illness. So I see this actually, in certain astrology transits where, like, if you don't answer the call of the soul and what you need to learn in that moment, it's like God turns up the volume on the experience.
That's what Carl Jung talked about as well in terms of fate.
Yeah.
And destiny, the unconscious will manifest outer events in order to push you to your life's quote-unquote purpose. But in these examples you gave, for example, especially infidelity and cheating, the wounded ego right away will get into blame mode.
Yes,
right?
of course.
Without understanding, honestly, the whole complexity of how this occurred because of suppression and unconscious psychological mechanisms.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen people who were really unhappy in a relationship for a very long time, and then the relationship finally fell apart and they were free from it, even though they were unhappy in it for a long time. The other person left them. But then they just went and blamed their partner, be like, oh, he's a sociopath, narcissist, blah, 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 right? That may be true, but blaming them isn't going to help you on this next stage in your path. The more important thing is to why did I marry someone? And why did I end up in a marriage for so long with someone who was like that? That's the more interesting question that will point you towards the next step you need to make.
Yes.
So... And I also so let's talk about how to tell the difference between soul desires and ego desires. I really want to outline, as much as I would love to give you the hack, it's going to be a process of inner work. You have to be connected to your body, your feelings, your own inner world, so that when you are reflecting on something, you can be aware of your own inner world enough to know what lights you up and what doesn't, right? So, because the mind can lie to you, but the body less so. So the mind can tell you, oh, yeah, of course I want to follow this path because that's what's going to bring me, money, and this is what's a good job or whatever, right? But your body doesn't feel aligned with it. So I do think somatic work, and I mean also shadow work. Shadow work is such a crucial process because there could be gifts that you disowned a really long time ago because your parents didn't validate in you, or they judged them as not important. So you actually have to go back and look at what, you were told by your parents, what was good, what was bad. But also as an adult, you can notice this towards your projections. Is there anyone that you just really tend to negatively project upon, or any group of people? Or is there any group of people that you tend to positively project upon? Because the positive projections and the negative projections show you the qualities in the outer world that you need to own. So I also recommend people, when you find someone who you just really lights you up, you feel really drawn to them, they have this magnetic quality within them, there's something that you just admire in them, to recognize that person is a reflection of the soul qualities that you need to develop in yourself. they may have those qualities themselves, but we need to realize that our projections have the qualities of our own soul, but we're attributing them to coming from the other person when it's really coming from us. So I think it is really important at a certain stage to have people that you can look to who are examples of the life that you would like to live. Do not follow in their footsteps, please, because I see people do that again and again, just do everything that they wanted to do, but rather reflect, what qualities do these people I admire have, and how can I develop those more or unearth those more in myself?
So we go deeper into differentiating between ego desires and soul purpose in the second hour. But just to bring it down also as a prerequisite, it's really about, again, saying it over again, to know thyself. So it requires a certain level of self-awareness, and also it requires a certain level of psycho-spiritual understanding of psychological processes, your inner world on a psychological level, and to really examine who am I, why do I want what I want, where did this desire come from, to even going back to childhood. A lot of could be based on childhood wounds, working through the father-mother wound. All of this is huge, especially family dynamics. We can install all kinds of desires and aims and goals in life we very identify with, but they are not our own.
And our parental complexes, as I would say in the Jungian world, these can be the biggest barriers to us realizing what we really want to do. So if we had a very negative, critical mother or father, right? That negative, critical mother, father will live on within our own psyche and put us down and tell us, you don't have the skills to do that. That's a stupid thing, right? We'll actually enact their ideas and their values in our own inner world through the mother or father archetype as a subpersonality within us. So just in a nutshell, we have many podcasts about this, retrieving your projection, shadow work. In the future, I'm hoping we can just do a shadow work 101 podcast just to give the ideas, but to notice that the things that you hate and admire in other people are actually projections of your own soul that you need to retrieve and withdraw, meaning stop blaming them or stop hating them or stop worshiping over them, and recognize that they're showing you something that you need to develop in yourself. And I think that's a great starting point for everyone, including your opposite sex partner, which is a whole other rabbit hole, because then we get into anima stuff as well. But how to know you're on your true path. The biggest thing, which you already named, is synchronicities increase. So, for example, I'll give a recent example, actually. One day when I was really diving deep into dream work and reading all these books on dreams and taking courses and studying, and my dreams were just getting more elaborate and intense. Actually, I'll give a shout out to her. Angela, our assistant, sent me a 8-hour talk about dreaming from Marie von France. She didn't know. And she had no idea I was getting into the stuff. So awesome. I'm just saying, little things like this will happen where someone will give you the right book, or you'll see a sign. You have to have your eyes open to finding these meaningful coincidences in the world, right? You have to have your eyes open. And also you have to take the next step. So if someone gives you a book and you're like, wow, I just feel really drawn to this book, sit down and actually read it, for example. Go down that path, right? Because we refuse the call and the signs can be all around us. And then certain doors will open too. Certain opportunities can come. There is a hidden hand of guidance, which we'll talk more about in part 2. Joseph Campbell talks about, but there is something that's going to be guiding us and helping us along the way. Yeah. And I also say one of the biggest signs is you just feel more alive, more authentic, and more yourself. Some big moments on my path where I felt like I was really connecting to my true nature, I actually felt the freedom and spontaneity that I did as a child. And I think this is when you know you're getting close to something important.
And another big attribute of that, or characteristic of being in that state of finding your true path, is, like Laura said, connecting more to the inner joy of the inner child. And when you're really so immersed in something that really excites you, makes you feel alive, but you do not care about the outcome. There's no about a reward thing attached to it.
Well, that's the ego.
Right, the ego coming in, I could make a shitload of money with this.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
How can I capitalize on this?
How can I capitalize this? It's not present. It's just you're fully immersed in that. That's how the most amazing pieces of art and literature or even scientific discoveries were initiated through this, almost obsession based on being really excited on passion. And also, number two, you're engaged in it and you do not care what other people think about it at all.
Yeah.
Right? So these are two key attributes to notice when you're truly on your true path. And it's also very unique to you. Very important what Laura mentioned, and we go deeper than that in the second hour. It's not what someone else has done. It's not about following somebody else's footsteps, or wearing somebody else's clothes, so to speak, as Joseph Campbell would say. It's uniquely you.
Exactly. So to close up with a quote, and this is again from James Hollis, I'm going to begin the quote. As Jesus is reported to have said in the Gnostic Gospel of Thomas, if you bring forth what is within you, what you bring forth will save you. If you do not bring forth what is within you, what you do not bring forth will destroy you. And just to stop the quote for a second, and he says, just to finish, this is the essence of what Jung means by individuation. So it's exactly as I was outlining before. If you bring forth what is within you, it will save you from this trap of meaninglessness. But if you don't, it does destroy you. Addictions, all sorts of weird neurosis and weird issues starts to show up when people refuse the call. It's very unique, but there's certain patterns. And then he continues, it is a service not to the ego, but to what wishes to live through us. Mm-hmm. While the ego may fear this overthrow, our greatest freedom is found paradoxically in surrender to that which seeks fuller expression through us. Enlarged being is what we are being called to bring into this world, contribute to society and our families, and share with others. It is wholly false to think that individuation cuts a person off from others. It cuts a person off from the herd, from collectivity, but it deepens the range in which more authentic relationships can occur. It may be necessary for us from time to time to absent ourselves from the world in order to reflect, regroup, or revision our journey, but ultimately we are to bring that larger person back to the world. Yeah, I know you want to say something about this, but I just want to, this is a really important point actually, because a lot of people think that individuation is just living this isolated, alienated life. You actually need to separate from the herd for a period to find out who you are beyond that conditioning, but you need to return to the herd with the gift of your true self.
Yeah, that's what Joseph Campbell talked once you have found also even the Holy Grail, the treasure. It's the return, the call to return, integrate into society with your gifts to contribute, right? In whichever way it works for you. And many people refuse the return. Because out of their own pride, because of I don't fit in here, we're still haven't fully gone through the process, or the ego again hijacks the process as well and lives in a state of separation, right?
Yes.
And doesn't want to deal with with the peasants, with the normies and all of that. Kind of it's almost a sense of pride gets interfered with it all.
Yeah, and I think there's some sort of wound to driving it. I think that the soul will call you deeper and deeper and deeper. And I think that a lot of people think that individuation is just being very Aquarius and saying F you to society and being outside of the norm. That's not really what it's about. It's about really retrieving your true nature and then bringing that back into the world. And that's a process of descending into your own inner world.
Yeah.
So, okay. So for those who want to join us for the second hour, again, for who are already a member, we'll see you there. And for those who are not a member, you can go to veilofreality.com/membership. And in the second hour, we're going to talk about how many people who talk about purpose can potentially mislead you and why the conventional approach just to this loss of meaning won't necessarily work. We're going to talk about how our complexes and our shadow are where we need to turn to find our purpose. We're going to share more about the projection of positive and negative qualities, the shadow as a source of creativity, how there can be a sense of guilt when you begin to individuate. And we'll discuss more about that. We also want to talk about how sometimes we live our parents' unlived life, not by doing what they asked us to do, but just by rebelling against the opposite. And what's that about? We also want to talk about why Jung suggests that individuation tends to happen after 35. I actually disagree with this, but I want to share about why he said that, and maybe we can discuss it in light of what's going on in today's culture. We want to talk about the difference between career, vocation, and how to differentiate between the two, and also what does Joseph Campbell have to say about following your bliss? What are the misconceptions around following your bliss? And then also share more about what soul purpose is not, what soul purpose is, and the aspects of it. So for those who want to join us, we will see you on the second hour.
Thank you for listening, and we'll be right back.